wanted to use
Really short.
But when you look at this non-voter pool, the problem for Democrats is that the intermittent voter class are largely Democrats. The sharp drop-off in non-voters, between voters and non-voters in the percentage who are white, it is incredibly significant. Only 56% of non-voters are white, non-Hispanic versus 73% of sort of what I'd call the permanent voting class. African Americans, again, much more stable, in part because you have had substantial interest in these elections since 2008, but you've also had a really massive voter registration campaign that I would put akin to the Jesse Jackson campaigns in the 1980s, where you just had a massive effort that was heavily concentrated in the southern states because that's where black voters are. I think those two things have combined to make African American voters not really the drop-off vote. But then you get to Hispanics, who already undervote their population share more than any other population, but who dramatically undervoted in midterms. And in Florida, that really matters. In Colorado, that really matters. And you also have within Hispanics a settling, a friend of mine, Fernanda Mondi, who's a pollster in Florida, has talked about the fact that Latino voters are beginning to settle into an African-American style pattern of being net Democratic voters, almost 2-to-1, if not more, when during the 2012 and 2008 elections. But there's a huge drop-off between the attitudinal placement of Latino voters and their actual behavior, particularly in midterms. They just don't come out. And then in this particular election, I think you had an extreme lack of motivation even to vote for the Democrats because of other issues like immigration, which were unfulfilled wishes that the Democrats just didn't fulfill them. Among women, I think that Democrats tend to look at women voters as one group instead of two, because you have a marked difference between the behavior of married and single women, and issues I think that Democrats put forward like abortion and contraception really are not motivating to married women the way they are to single women, and are not motivating to white voting women the way they might be to non-white women. And they're not motivating to older women as they are to younger women. So I think the failure to sort of parse that out didn't help either. But the other big difference really is on this religion question. Particularly mainline Protestants and evangelical Protestants have just culturally become Republican. And I'm not sure that Democrats necessarily can do much about that, in much the same way that I'm not so sure Republicans can do much about the cultural identification of African Americans with the Democratic Party. I think that you just have a lot more tribalism in our voting behavior as a country, regionally, ethnically, and age-wise, and again, age being heavily seeded with race. One of the other interesting pieces of this thing that really sort of stuck out to me in terms of that religion was that while Catholics tended to be somewhat more down the middle, particularly when you add in non-white Catholics, the white evangelical Protestant identification with the Republican Party is almost as substantial as African American identification with the Democrats. And so the challenge facing Democrats, I think, going forward as they look to this, sort of lurching back and forward between full participation elections, well, not even full, something like 60% participation elections when there's a president, the White House in play, to sort of 40%, and in this case, lower than 40% participation elections, is that drop-off is substantially in their camp. And Democrats have not found a way to both motivate their base vote of non-white voters, but also run what I think was a very off-putting sort of campaign in which Democrats attempted to solve their Southern problem by presenting as not Democrats and sort of presenting themselves as people who've actually never heard of the Democratic Party, don't know who that guy is in the White House, have absolutely nothing to do with him, but at the same time really need to get out African American voters who are most motivated of all by that same president. And then the last thing I'll say is I think that one of the things the Democratic Party failed across the spectrum to do was to try to reach whatever persuadable white working class voters were available on the economy. If you look again at Robbie's numbers, voters who perceive the economy as doing well went for the Democratic candidates. Voters who perceived the economy as doing poorly did not. Democrats never messaged on the economy. I can't think of a single race in this cycle where Democrats messaged positively on the macroeconomic data. Now, people's personal perception of the economy is one thing, but telling the story of the economy is quite another, and Democrats just